So I think we'll get a bit of quorum here, so we'll get started with this. So thanks a lot for joining Sumo Logic and myself today. What we're going to do is we want to give you a demo of our end-to-end observability solution we have here. So I myself, Ulf Andreasson, I'm a senior sales engineer here in EMEA, and I'm also joined by my manager, Clive. You want to introduce yourself?
Well, thanks, Ulf. My name's Clive McDonald. I head up the sales engineering team for Sumo Logic in EMEA. I'll just be surfacing some questions. So any questions that you have in the course of Ulf's excellent demo, I'll try to answer them, or I'll deflect them to Ulf because he'll know far better than I will in relation to being able to respond to those questions. So without any further ado, I'll hand back over to you, Ulf.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I mean, if you have any questions, we get the Q&A panel that you can use to kind of send in questions there. That's the best one. Yeah, so for the next couple of minutes, I want to take you through a demonstration to basically kind of a troubleshooting process for an on-call engineer. And what we're going to do is we kind of step by step, we're going to receive an alert and kind of see what we, what kind of alert and how that's coming to us. We'll explore kind of metrics around the information that we've been given in this alert. And then effectively, we're going to be using sort of logs and traces to identify the services that's impacted and effectively what is the root cause of this. So we can really want to show you how you can use kind of Sumo, as in Sumo Logic, to kind of really be able to have a holistic view, but still be able to get into the details and sort of really kind of pivot between the different sort of data sources, or, whether it's logs, metrics, or traces, right? As you may have as you may know from before, or if not, then Sumo is a unified platform for effectively handling all the kind of application and infrastructure telemetry. And what we mean by that is that any kind of data source that's effectively human readable can be sent into Sumo. And we will handle the whole sort of plumbing, the platform, the scalability, reliability, and all of those kind of things is already handled by us. So you can really focus on using that data, which effectively means that, to monitor your environment and applications, detect the kind of issues and, whatever it may be, right? But also kind of get alerts from it, so you don't have to sit there and watch something continuously. Now, when you have a issue being sort of developing, then you can be able to, then you can use the kind of Sumo information that's already been collected to identify the different services and components that are impacted, but also what kind of problem you have. So be able to fully troubleshoot and understand the root cause of any kind of reliability issues or application issues. And then also kind of help you to restore and make sure that when you've restored something, you can kind of really follow up on that too. So whether it's configuration changes or any other changes there, then you can you have that in Sumo effectively. So, and different personas are going to kind of use, different sort of aspects of Sumo in that sense. So from an on-call engineer perspective, we, in this demo, we're actually going to follow the whole kind of way through, right? But many times it's just a question of monitoring, while more other personas is maybe doing the diagnosis or troubleshooting here. So it all depends on, your skills and your use case. But I guess my point here is that to just monitor an infrastructure is actually at the top of the iceberg. There's so much data that could be, that you need to have to be able to kind of fully act upon sort of issues and events that are taking place in your environment. But without further ado, kind of let's go into the demo. So I want to show you sort of a example here, which basically is a Java-based application. It's a payment service that's kind of communicating to, or a payment service that's kind of deployed in a Kubernetes cluster it runs all in sort of AWS, and it uses an account service that basically stores all the data in an RDS database. Now, this is a mission critical application, and it runs in all my banking. Sorry, I didn't say, but it's a banking application as well, of course. And it runs in all my banking locations, right? So it's important, it's mission critical, it really kind of needs to be running. And that's kind of the major thing here, right? So as an on-call engineer, whether it's in the middle of the night or wherever it is, right? I may sort of receive an email, and I'm actually going to be notified about the issues here. So I can see that there's an SLO that's been breached. And I can see the time frame and eventually different kind of trigger values or conditions of that too, and effectively sort of the, what level of sort of breach I've reached and so on. But the beauty here is that I'm sort of also given a link in this email. So I can just click on that link, and that will take me straight into the Sumo platform and into the kind of relevant view, so to speak. We have a lot of different sort of ways to visualizing data in Sumo, but the beauty here is that I can really pinpoint the exact view I want to show you, and this is what we're using in sort of the alerts, of course. So as you can see here, I get in with the right time frame. I can see that I got an error rate, sort of a high level of errors here. And I also, my blue line is effectively the number of errors, and I can see that it's subtly increasing. Now, I do have sort of an automatically calculated deviation from this, but maybe more importantly, this is the outlier that kind of triggered the alert. And I can see that this kind of, increased amount of error rates is kind of something that, of course, is kind of something I need to act upon. Now, not only do I see that I have these alerts and that there's a sort of significant load in the system, I can also, Sumo can help you with identifying the kind of customers that may be affected by this. And of course, the beauty with this is that knowing who's affected, I can let my kind of customer support team effectively contact those customers or eventually do something with those customers to make sure that the impact is as minimal as possible. So that's actually very good to be able to do that, and we can kind of swiftly move on and make sure that everyone's happy so far, or at least as happy as they can be. Now, for my own sense and my own company, I want to know how this is impacting me or us. Because this may help me to prioritize, if it's not that urgent, if it's, it may not be that complicated or not sort of that severe, but at the same time, the impact on kind of transactions or dollars transferred may be huge. And therefore, this is kind of very important for me and my prioritization, or at least kind of understanding what we need to do here. Now, not only do we do that, but we then kind of technically speaking to sort of, progress this issue here, right, is what I've done is that I've also kind of laid out the error rates by pod. So effectively, in a Kubernetes cluster, everything runs within a pod. And what I'm doing here is I'm kind of laying these out. So what I can see here and what I can defer from this kind of honeycomb view is that basically there's a lot of sort of payment services that seem to be red. So this is not just one single problem. This looks more like a sort of deployment issue, something like that, otherwise I wouldn't expect to see this many kind of red pods effectively. So what I can do here to progress this is that I will go in, and just clicking on this pod here gives me some more information. I could go straight into the logs, but as I said, this is probably more than just a pod problem. And what I then can do is actually go in and see the kind of entity relationship here, because all the data that's coming into Sumo is effectively tagged with a lot of different metadata, which really kind of puts me in context. So as I want to kind of drill deeper into this, what I will do here and try to understand my problem is that I'm actually going to go to the entity dashboard to be able to kind of fully understand where the payment service is, kind of how that relates to other services within my account here, right? So what I can see here is that I look in the Kubernetes deployment view, and I can see that this is kind of part of my banking application, and it is the payment service as we've kind of spoken about. But also interestingly, I mean, the cluster seems to be running quite okay. There's no sort of immediate problems per se. I do have a lot of payment service errors here, and there's also many connection errors. And when I look at the type of connections error, they seem to be associated with the accounts service as well, right? So I'm getting a bit of a picture here that this is kind of connection issues between payment service and accounts. I can sort of drill further into this, and effectively, when you're looking at services communicating to each other, the best means of investigating this further would probably be to use traces. So with that, again, I can sort of drill further into this, but at this point in time, I'm actually want to look at the sort of traces for this environment. And this means that, you have all these different sort of aspects of data sources here. But in this case, for the kind of payment service, we're going to start to look at the traces of this. And as you know, what Sumo is kind of doing here is that we're taking all these traces, and trace is effectively a way to sort of measure and understand the communication between different services. And we talk about distributed tracing here. So this is really about sort of microservices communicating to each other. What I can see here is my sort of payment service and all the kind of services that, all the microservices that reaches out to sort of the accounting service. What I also want to add to this is that I could add another filter to say that I'm only interested in kind of traces where I have a number of errors over kind of 0. So effectively, showing me the ones which really has an error. So because I could potentially see all kind of traces as well. So I have a lot of sort of capabilities to filter this out, right? And you can see here that the duration of the sort of connection here is kind of shown here, right? But what I want to do is take you deeper into this and kind of really show you some examples here. So here's one trace that we want to dig deeper into, and we can see that the aspect of the payment service seems to be pretty okay. It's supposed to be green, but on my screen here it's kind of more like green and yellow. But effectively, once that service is then starting to communicate to the accounting service, that's really when I see the problems. And you saw that in the previous screen, I had multiple of these. So again, this kind of really is a bit of an issue with regards to my sort of payment service communicating to the accounting service, and that's kind of where it stops. So to dig deeper into this, what I would want to do is, again, I have all the metadata with this span. It's all kind of all the aspects of that. But so moving deeper into this, what we'll do to really try to understand is to look at the logs. And now we are looking at the specific logs for that container and that trace. So I'm able to kind of pivot here from the traces and go straight into the logs that are both in time frame and sort of fully in context with all my traces here, or also with this specific trace here. And when I look at that, this is just a kind of short time frame, but I'm still kind of seeing something like 2,300 different log messages. And looking at these logs, I mean, it's kind of, it talks about SQL errors in many of these places. So I can defer from that this really is a database issue. I can also see in many places that there's too many connections. I see this in a lot of different log lines. So basically, there's definitely some kind of issue. Here I see some connections not available and timing out after 3,000 milliseconds. So basically, I can defer from this that this really is some kind of database connection issue. And, it would sort of, it would apply to the kind of architecture I have where the accounting service is talking to an RDS database as well, right? To further make sure that I sort of have a good understanding or to kind of confirm my assumptions here, what we can use is something in Sumo called log reduce. Log reduce is a unique capability that Sumo has, and it actually uses machine learning. And what we do is that we group or we identify different log lines looking pretty much the same. It's not sort of like syntactical, identification, but basically it's trying to differ from each and every log line what the meaning of that is. And the beauty with this is that it basically says from this screen here, from still my 2,300 log lines, I can see that 759 of these log lines are effectively saying connections not available.
Sorry, I've got a question from
yeah, sure.
the audience. In relation to, let me just make sure that I'm reading this correctly. So the question is, this log reduce functionality, does it sample data, or is this a reflection of all of the log data related to the query that you've just made? I think
that is a very good question, because no, this is not sampling at all. This is actually taking each and every log line of these 2,339 log lines, and it inspects each and every log line of those. So this is a absolute representation. And actually, it's a kind of good pivot, because what I can do here from this log line, as you can see that some of these variables are sort of highlighted with a hash mark or just a date or something like that, but I can expand on each of these log lines, which basically means, I expand one level, I can then expand another level and so on. But this kind of really means that I can get to the details. I can find every log line that I actually have here. So, if I really want to have the details, I can just view the details from here, right? So thanks a lot for that question. But so this really kind of highlights that, connections not available, as well as too many connections, those are effectively all the emails, all the log lines that I'm receiving with regard to this issue. I get a SQL exception handler, exception helper here as well. But basically, this is kind of very much in line with, okay, my database is effectively not able to kind of make sure that I can connect to it. And most often, this kind of, what this really means is that there's typically sort of a connection issue there. It could be memory that's running out or the database is running out of resources because of memory, or sort of CPU or something similar to that. Now, as I'm an on-call engineer, I want to make sure that my first priority is really restore the application. And that's effectively what I can do. So I will go over to the database guys. I can sort of talk to them, eventually inspect and check the memory allocation, the number of max connections we can have for the database and so on, and make sure that the kind of application is coming back up to to production health again. So that is really kind of, that's kind of concludes that, yes, we can get the system up and running again, and we can be happy with that. Now, it may not be sort of complete in a way that what we further would like to understand is the kind of root cause of this. So what could the potential cause of this be? And Sumo has added the AWS Observability solution that also includes what we call the root cause explorer. So this will help me to understand. And what I want to do with this is trying to figure out, understand why this could happen in the first place. So the beauty with the root cause explorer, and I'll show you that here, right? So this really kind of takes the same time frame And it shows me all the different aspects of sort of deviations from normal that I may have in the environment. And, you know, we talk about events of interest, but it's based around the kind of error, latency, bottlenecks, throughputs, and things like that, load, right? So what I want to do here then is, first of all, I can kind of focus on a bit more of the time range that I'm looking for. Now, there's a lot of different aspects here. And as you can see, just hovering around them, I can see what type of problem. So first of all, they color-coded here, but I can also kind of see, you know, how much of deviation we have, as well as what kind of time frame. So maybe these are kind of going on for a bit longer, or maybe it's just kind of a short instance of a deviation, right? Now, to kind of make it even simpler for me, I can also sort of filter the data here so that I'm focused on sort of my SQL or my payment service or whatever it is, right? And hopefully you can see these because they light gray. But basically, I can see some increased CPU loads here happening sort of quickly, right? And they tend to align to a increase of disk usage. And this is all related to the MySQL application, or database rather. So what I then can do is that I can sort of just click on these things, and again, I'll get the more information here. So I can see sort of what region or account, where they are, kind of, again, all the context that I had before. What I also can see is kind of metrics for these things. So depending on what they show and the time frames, this is also not just the metrics itself, but it's actually the sort of time shifted or compared to like another day or so. But probably more importantly in this case, because I have these kind of increased CPU loads and sort of the IO sort of intensive usage here of the disk, this typically relates to some kind of slow questions or SQL queries that are taking very long time. So what I want to do from here is effectively looking at this kind of RDS load, and I can pivot into all the log lines that's related to that. And this will actually show me that, you know, running sort of one thing that Sumo can monitor as well is effectively the status of the database. So we can see here that the query time for many of these SQL queries have been extremely long, right? So kind of 700, 600 seconds for each and every query. This kind of really helps us to understand that, you know, these kind of slow queries that eats up a lot of CPU, and of course, because of they eat up a lot of CPUs, the queries are taking longer to execute, and therefore you're getting more and more connections coming into the system. So this is most likely the kind of root cause of the issue we have here. And you know, I mean, this is kind of just one way that we could kind of use Sumo. Now, to be more proactive, you know, I can see that this is certainly an issue. So to be more proactive, what I would do to kind of pick this up in the future is that I would actually kind of create an alert that I would use, sorry, let me open up that. So I would create an alert using the predict operator in Sumo that would be able to kind of not just find a query that is slow, but also I would be able to predict the future of that. So if that happens, then I certainly want to be notified, and I can set the conditions of what is my sort of definition of a slow query and things like that. But then I can kind of make sure that this is being sent to me, or as with any kind of alerting system, it doesn't necessarily have to be an email. It could be sending an alert into Slack channel or to Team channel or PagerDuty or any other system you have there, right? So this is just one example. But to be able to kind of highlight the slow queries before it actually comes back to bite me in the way that is done today, as in my payment service stops kind of working because the account service isn't able to kind of do what it's supposed to do because of the database connections. So this very much kind of concludes the demo. And as you probably remember, where we started out was that we were getting this alert email, and which would kind of take us into the relevant view in Sumo. In this case, it was the dashboard for the kind of elevated error rates and the payment service. There we could, using that context, to fully understand the business impact of the issue, both for our customers, but also for ourselves. Using our Explorer, we could understand how the different services were related and impacted by each other. So effectively, we saw that the payment service couldn't communicate or unsuccessfully communicated to the account service. And drilling deeper into that, we used the traces to identify what kind of connection issue we had and why we weren't able to do that. From there on, we went using the logs and log reduce to fully understand and kind of confirm the root cause of this alert. Which basically, we confirmed what we thought was a root cause, but then using the root cause explorer, we could really see that the real root cause for the kind of that we were running out of connections was effectively that, the CPU load and the associated disk usage really kind of made RDS run out of connections. So from that aspect, setting up a new alert with the kind of predict operator, we could prognose what's going to happen in the future, and therefore next time we're going to be more prepared for that. So that was a lot sort of in a very short time frame. So I'm hoping you have kind of fully comprehended all these things. But if nothing else, we got some. Clive, do we have any questions or what?
Yes. Thank you very much, Ulf. Really great. And we have 3 questions, as a matter of fact. So first one's quite simple. I don't know if we can really address this fully, but how is this priced? How do we price tracing? How do we price this whole observability solution? And that was quite early on in the chat.
It is effectively no deviation from what Sumo does generally, which means that we charge based on ingest coming into Sumo. So if it's traces, then traces are going to be looking more like logs in the way that there's a lot of information in them, there's a lot of timings and things like that, but it will be sort of based on the ingest of data. So whether it's logs, metrics, that's kind of effectively what's being counted against here. The root cause explorer and the observability solution is mainly sort of collecting metrics into it. So the logs are associated with it, and as we have the kind of metadata tags to fully understand how the data is kind of the hierarchy of the data and all the objects or entities in there, then that sort of follows along with that. Basically, we can pivot from the kind of metrics in the root cause explorer into the logs that are relevant. Yeah,
I think that answers the question. And then the second question, I'll read this out verbatim. I'm a New Relic user currently. What do I need to enable in relation to distributed tracing? Will your agent provide the connectivity and context required for me to be able to trace connectivity?
Good question as well. So Sumo is all about kind of using open standards. And with that, we are fully behind the open telemetry kind of project or framework or whatever you want to call it, right? So if you're, as a customer, already using open telemetry and using New Relic, you probably are, then it's just a question of kind of routing the data to Sumo instead of routing it to New Relic, or you could potentially even route it to both of us, depending on what you want to do, right? But there is incredibly simple, and given the support from the open telemetry kind of framework, then it's incredibly simple to sort of start to use the tracing data in conjunction with kind of Sumo. Now, also, if you are ingesting data from a Kubernetes cluster, we are effectively doing this out of the box. So it's very simple to ingest data from a Kubernetes environment to Sumo. And as I said, in that question, in that sort of, if you do, then we're automatically gonna sort of ingest tracing data if you want to as well. And you can also kind of specify what deployments, what services, if you want to exclude any of that data and things like that. So it's very flexible and very configurable.
Great. And the final question is around Root Cause Explorer. So how does Sumo make the classification inferences in relation to signals and events as shown within your demo?
Yeah, so Sumo, we are fully behind the notion of how kind of Google in their sort of SRE definitions, how they kind of looked at the golden signals like load latency, bottleneck, and errors, right? We're fully behind that, and we kind of use that as a notion for how we have built our solution. We have a couple of more sort of, what do you say, sort of signal types in the Root Cause Explorer, but it really boils down to the kind of Google SRE handbook and the information we have there. So we think that's kind of a very good way of doing it, and it resonates well with many of our customers, and that's the way we do it.
Great. That's about it from the audience and the attendees as far as questions are concerned.
Okay. Yeah, so I think in that case, I mean, if any kind of questions in the future, we are available via email. So it's Ulf or Clive at sumologic.com. Yeah, I think with that, we want to thank you for your time. And if there's any questions, reach out to us or reach out to your sales person or account manager that you can speak to. And Clive, thanks a lot for kind of handling the questions and being part of this.
No, thank you. Really great demo, and thank you for your time for those who attended. So appreciate it, and thanks again, Ulf.
Okay, thanks guys.
Bye.
Have a good day.